Hello, everyone, and good noon, shortly afternoon. And welcome to the American Civil War Museum and the Museum of the Confederacy and White House branch of that. My name is James Thompson, and I will be doing the talk today on the trial and hanging of the Lincoln Conspirators, though I dislike the last part of that title since it simplifies it way too much, but we'll get into that in a moment. A few things to go over. First off, with this is being filmed for YouTube, so you can wave back to the camera if you so desire. So if you want to view it later, you can. You just go to YouTube and look at it on our YouTube channel, which if you do that, you're going to want to type in either American Civil War Museum in the search area or ACWM, but probably use the former one. That way you can actually find the channel, subscribe, and watch all the talks that we give on YouTube. So there's that. Now, second thing, you should all hopefully have the papers that I see many of you looking over now. Those I made up just to help y'all with notes, because I know a number of y'all like to take notes during these, so to alleviate some of your note-taking, I wrote down some facts and some general information for y'all. The back of it also has book suggestions, so hopefully at the end of this you're going to want to go off and read many, many things about the trial and the conspirators, because no matter how great I truly am, I cannot go over everything in this very short amount of time. So the books are very good. Real quick, my favorite one on that list is Blood on the Moon. That's probably the best one out of the whole group that I read. Very, very, very good book that also goes into the Confederate Secret Service some, which is incredibly interesting. So, as I said, today we're going to be talking about the trial for the Lincoln Conspirators. As the title is up here, "Let the stain of innocent blood be removed from the land." That's actually a quote from, I believe, Edward Stanton, and it is pretty much symbolic of the idea for the trial itself, which was the trial was hopefully a hope that afterwards it could kind of help heal the country from this extremely traumatic event that occurred on April 14th of 1865, which just coming at the end of the war, very big thing. We'll get into that in a moment. So I'm going to move on to this. But before, of course, we talk about the trial, we got to talk some about the actual plot that brought about the trial. Now, most people here how many here know of the kidnapping plot? Just raise your hand if you know about the kidnapping plot. Okay, a good amount so far already. But so the original plot was to kidnap Abraham Lincoln. Booth's plot was not the only one. There were at least 2 or 3 other plots to kidnap Lincoln. Mainly they were going to want to kidnap him between the Old Soldiers' Home, which I believe there should be a picture there. It was hard to find the actual Old Soldiers' Home picture on Google because there are many of them, so I wanted to make sure I got the right one. Now, because Lincoln would often travel out there very often, especially in the summertime, he was very vulnerable on that trip, so the idea was to capture him on the trip. Now, most of these plots were done in 1864 and 5, or at least brought up during that time, though as far back as 1862, President Davis was approached about an idea to actually kidnap Lincoln. But in 1862, Davis said no, because as of yet, the black flag of warfare had not been raised, which by 1864, though, that flag is definitely flying up atop both Capitol buildings, of course, metaphorically, at that time. So, idea was to capture Lincoln. Then they were going to take him to Richmond, get him to Richmond, and then ransom him for Confederate prisoners of war. Of course, hoping then to bolster Lee's army, which was losing troops constantly through just battles, but also some desertions and just people falling out from cases of malnutrition and so on and so forth. Also, of course, they would hope that maybe if they caught Lincoln and captured him, they could kind of use him for bargaining for a peace treaty. But the plan did not go through, and at least by about March of 1865, Booth changes his plan to that of one of assassination. But it's during the kidnapping plan that he actually recruits most of his co-conspirators that we'll talk about in just a moment. So Booth's plan, though, was not to kill just Lincoln. Hopefully that's not too big of a shock for everyone. That's why I also dislike calling this the trial for the Lincoln Conspirators, because it's more so the trial of the conspirators who hoped through overthrow, or at the very least cause tremendous chaos for the United States government, because the targets were not only Lincoln. They were planning on killing Lincoln, Grant, Seward, and Vice President Johnson. So hopefully by killing all of them, they could cause such chaos in the Northern government that with Davis's eventual flee west, the Confederacy could rise once again and somehow obtain victory. Doesn't really happen that way. But anyway, so the plot goes through, and you have the plot goes through, and of course, Lincoln is the only one that is actually assassinated. We'll talk a little bit more about as we get to the other conspirators, their roles in it, and how they failed at those. But pretty much the worst case scenario for this plot occurs, in which Lincoln is the only one killed. Johnson then becomes president, and we get the horrible Reconstruction years that just caused a lot of further turmoil down in the South and across the entire country. So let's go over the conspirators first. We'll talk about all the accomplices. This one here is David HEROLD. HEROLD was a Confederate agent operating in southern Maryland. Southern Maryland was a hotbed for Confederate operations. The Confederate Secret Service, which were not the guys who guarded President Davis, they were the Confederate spies and operatives. They operated a lot throughout the North, especially in those border states where Confederate sympathies were very high. Maryland being one of the biggest ones, especially southern Maryland and along the eastern shore from Maryland. So that's where HEROLD did a lot of operating. And he is the one who actually helps scout out Seward's house with Lewis Powell. They go to the house, they talk to the male servant there. They kind of ask him, how's Seward doing? What's his kind of daily routine? What's going on at the house? Pretty much scoping out the house for the eventual assassination plot. HEROLD is also the one that will escape with Booth on the night of April 14th and will be with them when he is captured out there at the Garrett Farm in Virginia. So we'll talk more about his defense and what happens to him as he is in the trial and a little bit on. But next, moving on to Edward Spangler. That's Edward Edmund. I have seen his name both ways. This is one of the most obnoxious things dealing with historical things with people that are not extremely well known, is they have multiple names. So Edward Edmund Spangler. He was a guy who was working at Ford's Theater. He was a stagehand. He was the guy who was essentially in charge of moving stage props. So at the right scene, he'd pull certain ropes and levers. That way the right stage equipment would be put on stage. He was there the night that Booth kills Lincoln. And what happens is that he gets involved in this because he is there. Well, first, Booth hands him his horse when he arrives, but Spangler will then hand that off to another hand that was nearby, and he'll hold the horse. But Spangler is also there. Reportedly, he closed the door as Booth ran out of the theater, and then when someone went out that way, he apparently slapped him and said, what are you doing? And the guy yelled, he went that way, and he slaps him again and says, for God's sakes, shut up, don't tell him where he went. So that's how Spangler is involved in this. We'll talk more about his defense and what happens to him also in a little bit. So next comes the creepiest person of them all. If you, I meant to mention when I first started on the accomplices, there's and you can all see on the bottom of the first sheet, people have gone back and taken black and white photographs and colored them, which is a pretty cool thing. It actually brings them more to life in a lot of ways. Every single photograph you see of this guy, though, Lewis Powell or alias PAINE, they all look modern. He's the most modern, antique person I've ever seen in my life for any photograph. Every picture of him looks like it was taken about 10 years ago. Now, he was a Confederate soldier for up to a time, but then he leaves the Army and moves up to southern Maryland and becomes a Confederate spy and operative. He gets early on involved with Booth, and there in January, and he meets him through John Surratt. Now, we'll talk about John Surratt later on. He is one of the key compilers of the conspirators, but ironically, he has also he's not even tried during the trial in May of 1860, in May and June of 1865, but his story after this conspiracy is probably the most interesting one of them all. We'll talk about that later on. But anyway, he meets through there, and he's assigned to kill Seward, and he does not do that. Well, what happens is, on the night of April 14th, he goes to Seward's house. He has a knife and a gun. He goes inside. He pushes the male servant out of the way. He is confronted by Seward's son. Seward had recently been in a carriage accident. He had a big iron thing around his neck to help his neck stabilize. Seward goes to pull his gun, Powell pulls his gun to shoot Seward's son. The gun jams. Seward essentially says, "Ah, crap." He then tries to beat the son. That doesn't work either. He pulls out a large Bowie knife and goes after him that way, stabs Seward's son, busts into the bedroom. Seward is laying there pretty much incapacitated in the bed. Powell slashes more people in the room, jumps on top of Seward, and starts stabbing him repeatedly, just over and over and over again. I believe his daughter just recounts the story as there was blood everywhere, and she's screaming out of the window that they're being killed in their beds. Seward somehow lives through all of this. He is stabbed repeatedly, even around his neck and head. Somehow the dude pulled through. I have no idea how, but he pulls through. PAINE, though, thinks he killed him. So PAINE leaves thinking, I stabbed him a bunch of times. I'm going to get out of here before I get caught. Paine leaves. He runs, and we'll talk about where he runs to, because where he runs to is incredibly bad luck for Mr. Paine here. He has probably the worst bad luck of anyone in this entire thing, except for maybe Edmund Spangler. So then we get Samuel Arnold. Now, he's a little bit of an interesting one. He was a Confederate sympathizer born up north, and he was a friend of Booth, as in Booth's younger years. He was a friend from Baltimore, and he is recruited early on for the kidnapping plot. But he leaves after that plot fails. He is not involved in the assassination. He is actually, at the time of the assassination, working at Fortress Monroe, which is incredibly ironic, because Fortress Monroe is actually where Jefferson Davis ends up being imprisoned. That fort is very ironic because so much happens there around the war itself. But anyway, he's actually working there. He's not involved in the assassination, but he is on trial for the assassination. And we'll talk about why that is in a little bit. So next we get O'Laughlin. Pretty much the same thing as Arnold. Confederate sympathizer, involved in the kidnapping plot, early friend of Booth, but not involved in the assassination at all. He is actually, at the time, he is working... he's working in Southern Maryland at the time, so he is not involved in the assassination at all either, but he is put on trial for the assassination. And we'll talk about why that is as well once again later on. Then we get poor ATZEROT. He's a bit of a sad case. He's born in Germany. He's born in, let's see if I can pronounce this right, Der Thüringer German Confederation, which at the time, of course, Germany did not exist in 1835. You have the Confederation of the Northern German states. So he joins the plot, once again, through John Surratt. The thing is, he's okay with kidnapping. He's a bit not okay, though, with killing someone. He thinks that's a little bit too far. He's assigned to kill Andrew Johnson. He actually rents a room at the same hotel Johnson is in. He's prepared to go through with it. On April 14th, though, instead of going to kill Johnson, he never makes it past the bar. He gets plastered, he wanders around, and he does not kill Johnson at all. As many people would probably say, if only he had succeeded, things would have been okay. If everyone else failed, that would have been okay, and he succeeded, but the one who could have been helpful didn't do his job. But anyway, so we'll talk about his defense a little bit later on, but yeah, he just chickens out, apparently. He's a pretty sad soul. Now, Samuel Mudd. This guy is one of the two conspirators who garners the most controversy about this entire event. Samuel Mudd was a very renowned planter in Southern Maryland. He was a very wealthy guy down there. He was a doctor. He was one of the leading figures of Southern Maryland. He was also a slave owner, so big-time wealthy guy there. He's also involved in a band of men to capture fugitive slaves. He's also involved in that heavily. But the thing is, he is a Confederate spy and operative. He was, from very early on, heavily involved in Confederate operations in Southern Maryland. He was one of the main leaders for that area. He did a lot of logistics work. He helped move mail from the south to northern parts, especially moving further up into Canada. He helped transport people up there, other Confederate operatives up there, and he was seen as one of the main Confederate just operatives in the area. And it's actually, he gives a lot of help to Booth. Now, regardless of what some have said about Mudd, Mudd knew Booth very early on in both kidnapping and assassination plots. Booth is actually introduced through Mudd by a guy, by one of the head guys in Canada. Now, Montreal, Canada was the main Confederate operations center for Confederate spies, Confederate Secret Service. Up in the north, they operated mainly out of Montreal, known as Little Richmond. The guy who ran that up there, whose name I do have here, let me just find it more quickly, Charles Martin, actually gave Booth a letter to give to Mudd as a letter of introduction, essentially saying, you can trust this guy, he needs your help, give him all of the logistical support you can for him to carry out his plot. Of course, at the time, that plot was just to kidnap Lincoln. But Mudd does continue on in helping during the assassination. And it's actually, we'll talk about ATZEROT a bit more but later on, but ATZEROT also implicates Mudd because there's a lost confession. It's a little twist in the whole story that's always fun when we get to that. But anyway, so Mudd, very controversial figure, and his story is also pretty interesting following the war, especially his descendants' story. That's very interesting as well. Now, probably though the most controversial figure in the entire one, and someone I'm sure everyone has heard about at least in some fashion, is Mary Surratt. She is renowned for being, a bit of a spoiler alert, hopefully you already know this already, she is the very first woman to be federally executed. That alone makes her the most controversial figure in this entire plot. She's also, though, guilty, but we'll talk about that in a moment. She was a Confederate sympathizer and operative. She was very wealthy, owning a very nice, very functionally and profitable tavern in what is called Surrattville. It is named after her last name. Her and her husband actually essentially found that area, and they start Surratt Tavern. Surratt Tavern is listed in Confederate documents as a safe house for Confederate operatives in the area. Her son, John Surratt, will actually be the mailman for the area, and through doing so help channel Confederate mail through the North. And what they do is you would have legitimate mail posted, the envelope would be for someone legitimately in the North, but inside there'd be another envelope containing actual secret information, spy information that Surratt would then ferry up to other parts of the North, specifically also, again, Montreal. So her tavern also was one of the very first spots Booth and his cohorts will go to, or Booth and Herold will go to when they leave Washington overnight of April 14th into April 15th. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But her boarding house is also an incredibly, incredibly important part to this entire story. President Johnson has a great quote about Mary Surratt. He calls her the nest that hatched the egg, because her house was essentially the gathering place for many meetings, not all, but many meetings by the conspirators who plotted to both kidnap and then assassinate Abraham Lincoln. They met there very often. There are multiple accounts by a guy named Weichmann, or Weichmann if you pronounce it more the German way, who was a boarder there at the house, of how Booth would come over regularly, and then Mary or Booth would ask Weichmann to leave the room so they could have a private conversation. There were often times of Mary meeting with Booth, meeting with other conspirators were seen at the house. And, if I want to get into it right, I don't want to get into it yet, but once again, she is involved with PAINE in a very, very unfortunate way for both of them, but we'll get into that in just a moment. But once again, she was a Confederate sympathizer and operative, and she helped out greatly throughout this entire thing. Now, John Surratt, I won't talk much about him here because we're going to come back to him at the very end, but he is probably the most interesting one of the entire group of cohorts because of his uniform he is wearing right there. If you know what that uniform is, do not blurt it out and spoil my surprises at the end, but it's a very interesting life that he lives following the April 14th, 1865. Of course, son of Mary Surratt, heavily involved in Confederate Secret Service operations. He was one of the main couriers going up to Canada. He was also one of the main guys who recruited other conspirators. He got, as you saw earlier, he got multiple ones to join Booth and meet with him. He met with Booth often when they were in town together, planning out the kidnapping plot and then also planning out the assassination plot. And furthermore, he helps also say that, look, once you've done the plot, the first place you need to go is Surratt Tavern, which of course him and his mother ran because that was a place where guns were stored, provisions were stored for the further escape south. So those were the conspirators, but the assassination, of course, does take place. The only one to do his job correctly is Booth, unfortunately. Now, I mentioned that Grant was a target. He actually was. Grant was a target, but Grant, by sheer happenstance, decides that he does not want to go to the theater that night with the president and his wife. He instead wants to go visit his children. That is very lucky for Grant and his wife, because if he was there, he would have been sitting in the same box with Lincoln, and Booth's plot was to walk in there and shoot both of them, and then, of course, jump the railing and run away. So the plot does happen. Booth does assassinate Lincoln, and he is on the run. Now, following the assassination, there is widespread hysteria throughout the North. Does anyone in this room remember when President JFK was killed? Okay. Do you remember what you felt after he was shot? What kind of the general atmosphere of the country was following that first week after him being shot? Does anyone want to share what that was? Shock. What else? Sorrow. Mass sorrow and crying in groups.
Unbelieving.
Disbelief. What about fear? Any fear? Feelings of fear during that time following JFK's assassination? What about 9/11? Everyone here should remember 9/11. any fear following 9/11 of more things coming along. That is what happens here, because there's a giant fear that there are massive rings of Confederate spies throughout the North, that this is only the beginning. In fact, Sherman, when he is down in North Carolina, when he receives word that Lincoln's been shot, also in that same telegram it says that he is a possible target. He never really was, but they're fearing that this plot is not, what their essential fear is much like after 9/11, and in some cases people will say after JFK, it was not a small plot to just kill a few governmental heads. It was to literally wipe out the entire Union command and the United States government. So there is mass hysteria. And just like even more so after 9/11, when there is talk of rounding up anyone who could possibly be a terrorist, there is that going on here as well. Hundreds of folks are rounded up for not being Union enough. Possible Confederate sympathies. Copperheads are seen as main targets because they were, of course, Northerners who supported the Confederacy during the war. They start being rounded up. You have anyone who is any way associated with Booth. They are brought in for questioning. You've got just massive arrests throughout the entire country. It's not helped by the media at all, who reports in numerous articles thousands of Confederate conspirators, hundreds of Confederate spies all over the place. There's a general hysteria going on, not to mention the fact, as y'all talked here about with JFK's assassination, there is immense sorrow. Even more so than with JFK, you've got a war that went for 4 years, over 600,000 have died. This should have been a time of happiness and of joy. Lee had just surrendered only a few days prior, and the guy who led them through this whole time was reelected and posed then for 4 more years of healing the country is killed. I mean, not only the anger that came out of that time as well, it's absolutely tremendous. I mean, you have people who before were very conciliatory to the South saying, okay, the war is over, it's time for us to set aside our differences. Almost instantly, so many of them changed to burn the entire South to the ground and kill them all. Because they're involved in this, they all deserve to die. The same thing goes off towards Jefferson Davis. Instantly there becomes this very heated thing against Jefferson Davis. We'll talk about Davis and the possible role he played in all of this in a little bit later on. But there's mass hysteria. Booth, of course, is chased throughout Maryland and into Northern Virginia. This is probably one of the absolute best manhunts of all time because they get him very quickly. He's only on the run for 12 days. He's killed April 26, 1865 at Garrett Farm. Now, when he is killed, Herold is there with him. So Herold is captured on that day as well. But there are other captures before that. You look up here, Edmund Spangler, he's arrested April 15th. He's let go, but got arrested again April 17th. He, though, is kind of a given for him being quickly arrested because he is actually at the theater at the time. So moving on to the next one, you've got Samuel Arnold and O'Laughlin. They're both arrested April 17th. Arnold working at Fortress Monroe. He happened to be a friend of Booth from early on. And, excuse me, one of the guys heading up the investigation was also from Baltimore and kind of knew the Arnold and O'Laughlin family and happened to remember that they also knew Booth. So the call went out, arrest Samuel Arnold. Same goes for O'Laughlin. He is arrested as well. Now, we get to the most unlucky part of this entire thing. We get to these two right here. Now, very early on, they knew that Booth and other conspirators had been meeting at Mary Surratt's house. And that is why only 2 days after the assassination, they're there at the house arresting her. They're there first. They actually go there, I believe, April 15th, the day right afterwards, to just investigate, just look around. But then they get some hints that maybe Mary is more involved. So they go back on the 17th. Mary is she's teetering on whether she's about to be arrested or not. She's saying she doesn't know anything. I don't know what's going on. Yes, Booth was here. Yes, these other people were here, but I rent too many boarders. I don't know what's happening. I had no idea they were going to kill Lincoln. I am very saddened. Although her house was the only house on the block without the mourning drapes on the outside. That didn't help her at all. But anyway, so she's saying, I don't know what's going on. Then a knock comes at the door. This is where it's if it didn't actually happen, you would never believe it. The officers and the soldiers in the house go to the door and open the door. Who's at the door? Lewis Powell is at the door, the guy who stabbed Seward a bunch of times. He is at the door. He has a bandana around his head. He is carrying a pickaxe. It's nighttime. The soldier asks, how can I help you? The guy goes, I might have come to the wrong house. I'm going to leave now. And the soldier says, well, why are you here? Powell says, I'm here to meet Mary Surratt. Big mistake there. He goes, well, you've come to the right place. Come inside. Why do you have a pickaxe? He says, well, I was hired by her to dig a ditch. The guy goes, it's dark outside. Why are you digging a ditch in the dark? Powell's just, well, I was supposed to dig it tomorrow. I came by to make sure she wanted me to actually do it and kind of get some more info on this. They're not believing his story at all. It gets even worse. Because Powell had, of course, been there before. He had actually posed as a priest, as a preacher, and living at the boarding house. He was, of course, wearing preacher, dressed like a preacher, and that sort of thing. And it was well known that by Weichman, who was boarding house there. He, of course, met Powell. Well, the officers there, the soldiers, want to check out Powell's story. So they call Mary into the kitchen. Mary comes into the kitchen, and they ask her, ma'am, have you ever seen this person before? And she says, I have never seen him. As God as my witness, I have never met this man in my life. That pretty much sealed her coffin, because then she is arrested, and they are both hauled off to jail. Because it is just too much of a coincidence, because Powell is immediately, very quickly, recognized by the house servant of the Sewards and pretty much the entire Seward family as being the guy who stabbed Seward. So it's a little bit too much of a coincidence for Powell to show up at Mary Surratt's house when she is already under investigation. So Mary also makes another very big mistake. One of the officers there says, do you mind if I search your house? Mary, of course, says, go right ahead. I've got nothing to hide. Yeah, she kind of did. Up there, the officers find essentially a small shrine to Confederate leaders and a picture of John Wilkes Booth. That does not help her much either. So Mary is arrested, so is Powell on those dates. Now next we've got George ATZERODT. He's arrested in Germantown, Maryland. He just got very unlucky. He essentially ran into Union soldiers out on the hunt, and he was brought in for questioning then. Next comes Samuel Mudd. Now this is also a very interesting and controversial part. As many of you probably know, Booth went to Mudd's house not long after he got out of D.C. As I mentioned before, he first goes to the Surratt Tavern. He goes there and he gets some supplies. He heads on then. He eventually goes to Mudd's house. Mudd is a doctor. Now, the way the traditional story goes, Booth only went to Mudd's house because he was a doctor and he wanted his foot set because Booth had broken his foot when he jumped out of the balcony. Well, he goes to Mudd's house. He stays there for the night. Mudd then lets him go. Booth, by the time, though, had actually shaved his mustache off. He was only wearing a fake beard. And Mudd, of course, sets his foot. Mudd then the next day goes into town, supposedly to get some more provisions and see what's going on in town. And Mudd will say he never knew what was actually going on. He just was doing his doctorly duties of helping a poor injured person. Mudd actually went into town to meet with some co-Confederate conspirators, kind of relating what's going on. Mudd does let it slip that he knows already about the assassination and that possibly Booth is involved. Well, he goes back to the house and talks with Booth. Booth says he's going to get out of there pretty quickly. Mudd then goes into town. He tells the officer in charge there, hey, I've got some suspicious folks at my house. You need to come check it out. Conveniently, though, Mudd waited until Booth and Arnold were already gone, or excuse me, Herold were already gone before he went and told the authorities that, hey, I've got Booth back at my house, or at least I've got some suspicious character there. So the officers go back there, they interview Mudd, they talk with him, they say, okay, that's fine, we're going to head away. They come back and interview again. There's a little bit of a tricky thing here. First, Mudd's wife tells the investigators, yeah, the guy, he had a fake beard. It definitely had to be fake. I actually saw it kind of fall off at one point, and he kind of put it back. Mudd never mentions this. Mudd the whole time says he had a beard. It was a full beard. It was a true beard, no mustache, true beard. He has no idea who this guy really was. Then the officers say, can we search your house? That's when Mudd says, oh, that's right. I forgot to tell you. I've got a boot the guy left under my bed upstairs. Honey, can you go get that for me? So his wife goes up there and gets it. Of course, in that boot, it is the initials of John Wilkes Booth. Mudd, of course, knew he had Booth there all the time. Mudd is then arrested and went off to prison. So The last one, of course, being David HEROLD, captured April 26 at the Garrett farm along with Booth. Booth is, of course, shot. HEROLD gives himself up. So that is how the main conspirators all come to be captured in a very quick order. I mean, look how quick this is. Aside from HEROLD here with Booth, you've only got about 6 days since Lincoln is shot, and they're all arrested. And these are pretty much all of the main conspirators, except for one, John Surratt. They're all arrested very, very quickly after this. Now, originally, when I was reading through this, I have to admit I thought this is very suspicious. This seems more like a hack job sort of thing, of a quick roundup. But actually, there were concrete leads to all of these points. Now, let's move on to the next one when we go to their imprisonment. They're held at the Washington Arsenal, which no longer really exists. This is one of the only good photographs here. This photograph is also very interesting. It's very difficult for y'all to see, but you can see the gallows are right here. This picture, of course, taken very close to July 7th when they were all executed, but you can see the gallows are being built there. They're housed here. Now, there's also a common myth that goes around that every single conspirator was hooded. That is not true. Mary Surratt did not have a hood placed upon her head, and Samuel Mudd had his taken off fairly early. But these are the hoods that they wore. You can actually go see them at the Ford Theater Museum up there. You can see the hoods they all wore. But the other conspirators were hooded the entire time. Now, while they're imprisoned there, their imprisonment is not as bad as most people will have you believe. It really wasn't a horrible, traumatic event. They're first mainly housed on two monitors, the USS Saugus and the USS Montauk. Hope I pronounced those right. And their jailer, if you will, was General John Frederick Hartranft. His last name is a little bit difficult to pronounce, but anyway. He's their jailer. Now, he's a pretty interesting fellow. Won't go into too much detail about him, but he is actually a Medal of Honor winner. He gets it, though, many years after the war, but he gets it for his actions at the Battle of First Manassas. So they're in jail. Now, their regulations while they're in jail are extremely strict. They can have no contact with the outside world, except for at times there are allowances for a few meetings, of course, eventually with lawyers and a few family, but mainly no contact outside world at all. Then, as I mentioned, except for Mudd and Surratt, they are hooded. And another thing is they're not allowed any eating utensils at all because they're afraid that they're going to kill themselves. And this goes into the point of the original title for this, of removing the stain of innocent blood. The government does not want these people killing themselves because they want a trial. They want a fair trial. They want to actually go by law, that they tried these people by law, they found them guilty, and they got the right people. They don't want anyone getting off by killing themselves before they could actually try them and execute them for their crimes. And they're actually pretty wise in doing this because one of them, Powell, who has been claimed to be crazy, though he really wasn't, though his picture certainly is, he actually does end up banging his head repeatedly up against the wall to hurt himself. If you want to hurt yourself, don't do it that way. That takes a long time and it's very painful, but don't do that. Anyway, he does bang his head up against a prison wall. Now, their daily routine is also very strict. They get 3 meals a day. Their prisons are checked twice daily, make sure they don't have any contraband or anything that could hurt themselves. They are also checked by a medical officer every single day. That is done, once again, to make sure they're all healthy. This is also very important because they're afraid that, first off, they're going to get sick and die, but also they don't want anyone being insane because they don't want anyone having any mental breakdowns where they can't stand trial. So they are checked every single day for medical reasons. Hartranft himself will actually do a lot of the checking of the prison cells himself as he goes throughout. Then, there's another thing as well. The arsenal is modified. It's modified in a way that they can move the prisoners from their cells to the courtroom without them ever being seen by the outside public, which was kind of a good thing. They don't want any hecklers there yelling at them. They don't want anyone taking a pot shot and maybe shooting one of them, which, because as I mentioned earlier, a lot of anger is in the country right now over this assassination. But also they just want to kind of make it easier getting them from point A to point B without any just general hassle. So that's their main imprisonment style there. It wasn't totally bad, though it, of course, is prison, so it wasn't so great either. Let's go to the trial. The trial is incredibly important as well. May 1st of 1865, President Johnson issues his proclamation establishing a military tribunal for the conspirators. Now, this has come under a lot of criticism by later historians, some folks at the time, well definitely at the time, that this was unconstitutional, that they should have been tried by law. But they were tried by military tribunal, which did have precedent. There were tribunals held out in the West during the war that covered many different things. And the basis behind the tribunal was it was an act by Confederate operatives against the head of the United States military. Furthermore, it was all conducted in a military zone, Washington, D.C. Therefore, it did not fall under civil court jurisdiction. It fell under military jurisdiction. Now, after this all occurs, I believe it was 1867, I believe, might have been 66, the Supreme Court does rule that such things are illegal to happen, that when civil courts are in operation, that anything like this will always fall under their jurisdiction. But this is 1865, that court ruling has not occurred, so it's all very legal at the time. There are 9 judges, which you can see them all laid out here. And this has 9 judges plus the prosecution attorneys. All judges are military officers. They're mostly generals, which is probably the only criticism I would give to the trial because they weren't lawyers. But they do follow as close as possible civil law at the time. They weren't just using military law for the whole thing. So moving on, these are the prosecution guys. You've got those 3 guys there, John Brigham, Joseph Holt, and then Henry Burnett over there. Those are the 3 main prosecution. Now the prosecution's case is twofold. First off, the main person they want in this is not a single person I have listed in the conspirators part. The main person they want, especially John Advocate, especially Holt there in the middle, they want Jefferson Davis. So that guy right over there. They want him. Holt believes explicitly, not only him, Stanton believes it, and the Attorney General of the United States believe it, that Jefferson Davis gave the kill order to kill President Lincoln. They believe that completely, and they spend the first few days of the trial trying to make a case that Davis knew about this and that he is an unindicted co-conspirator. They don't actually make that case successfully, but they do try that very, very forcefully. Then, of course, they go after the others as being all just conspirators in the assassination. So, the defense. Real quickly, I'm not going to go over all these names, but those are the defense attorneys. The one I will mention is the guy with the star. Does anyone by chance know who he is?
Is he related to Sherman?
Yes, he is General Tecumseh Sherman's brother-in-law / foster brother. Sherman marries his foster sister, and that is his brother-in-law right there. Just incredibly interesting point. He's also Supreme Court Justice for Kansas. But anyway, now the defense of each of these conspirators will go over very, very quickly because I am running a little bit late. So first with David Herold, his main defense was that he was essentially not very smart. He was described, the multiple witnesses described him as boyish, trifling. There's one great quote of him, of one guy saying, he is more comfortable with boys and not men, meaning his brain has not evolved to a point where he'd actually make a decision to try and kill someone. It doesn't work. The fact that he's caught with Booth kind of sealed his fate from the very beginning. He had no chance whatsoever, and he will be executed. Next comes Spangler. His main thing is just that I didn't actually slap the guy. I didn't really do anything I did. I just happened to be at the theater at the wrong time. So his case is the shakiest case for the prosecution. He gets off with 6 years. Next comes Lewis Powell. Powell makes no defense that he is innocent. He completely admits he is guilty. He kind of had to. He was recognized multiple times. He also showed up with a pickaxe. So he's completely guilty, and he accepts that. His defense, though, is that he was a Confederate soldier attacking the United States military. He essentially says his actions were no different than the line soldier firing at a different regiment. The only difference is he was going after the commander and not the Corps of the Army itself. Doesn't work, and he's executed. So that's his main defense, though. There was also some talk of him being crazy, but he never actually was. Arnold and Laughlin. These two poor sorry saps. Now, they were involved in the conspiracy trial for kidnapping, but they did walk away for the assassination. So you might be wondering why they're on trial now. The thing is, under conspiratorial law back then, it's pretty much the same today. If you were involved in a conspiracy from any point, you are guilty of the entire thing no matter what happens. It does not matter if they were involved in just the kidnapping. The fact it became an assassination means they're also guilty of the assassination. And even though they walked away, by law, they did not, because to legally walk away, they would have had to go to the authorities and let the authorities know that this conspiracy is going on. Because they did not do that, they were guilty, and therefore they were tried. They both get life in prison. Then we get George ATZERODT. His defense was, I didn't actually do it, so why should I be killed for it? He's essentially just begging for his life, essentially saying, I chickened out. I couldn't kill the guy. I didn't want to kill him. I was kind of coerced into it. I didn't kill him. He gets executed. So didn't work for him. Then we get Samuel Mudd. Mudd, of course, he has a lot going for him because he's a very renowned figure. He's a gentleman. He's an aristocrat. He's very well known in Southern Maryland. That helps him more than anything. Essentially, it's the idea that someone of his status, of his social status, could not possibly be involved in an assassination plot. So he pretty much gets off with that, and he gets life in prison. We'll talk about what happens to them in just a moment. Because for life in prison, guys get off earlier. Mary Surratt, though, is not very lucky because with the fact that her house was used multiple times for the conspiracy, Weichman said that on April 14th, she actually takes provisions and supplies to Surratt Tavern, including a field glass to be used by John Wilkes Booth when he gets out there. So because of that and because of the fact that her house was used, she met with Booth very often in secret. She is found guilty and she will die. So, moving on to the execution part. I think I hit everyone. Yeah, I hit them all for that. Sentencing. Executed, you got Mary Surratt, David HEROLD, Powell, and ATZERODT. Jail time will be for Mudd, O'Loughlin, Arnold, and Spangler. Now, these two guys get lucky. Mudd and Arnold are both pardoned in 1869, if I remember this correctly. Mudd is mainly pardoned because they're sent to Fort Jefferson. Mudd is sent to Fort Jefferson down there in the dry Tortugas off of Florida. Yellow fever breaks out down there. Mudd is a doctor, so he helps try and administer to the sick because the fort's doctor was one of the first to be killed off. So Mudd does help out. Because he helped, he is pardoned. Arnold is also pardoned in 1869. O'Loughlin is unlucky because he also was at Fort Jefferson and he caught yellow fever and he just didn't make it. So, but he also most likely would have been pardoned as well. Spangler got 6 years and did the 6 years and went off to live the rest of his life. Last thing to kind of go over is, before we get to one more thing before this, is the one who got away. John Surratt is incredibly interesting. Very, very interesting because it's just funny. He's very involved in the setting up the plot to kill Lincoln and to kidnap him. He is, though, not in D.C. when it occurs. He's up in New York on April 14th. He hears about the assassination, and he quickly gets out of town. He runs first to Canada. And then from Canada, excuse me, he's being hunted. The authorities know he's guilty, and they want him badly. He makes it, though, to Europe. He goes to Italy at the time. Does anyone know the uniform he is wearing? Not Garibaldi, but you're very close with the Italy part. Exactly. He becomes a papal guard. He helps guard the Pope. But he is extremely unlucky because, once again, if it was not true, you would not believe it. Because while he is a Pope's guard, someone else is also a Pope's guard, a guy he knows from Maryland. He recognizes him. That guy goes and tells the authorities. And then Surratt has to very quickly get out of Rome. He runs to Alexandria, Egypt. But unfortunately for Surratt, the telegraph does exist, and word does get to Egypt before he gets there. He is arrested almost immediately when he steps off the boat. He is then sent back to America, and he is tried. But he does get lucky because he is found innocent, because the statute of limitations are around at that time, and the government cannot try him for the conspiracy or the assassination of Lincoln. He gets tried for a minor charge, which they cannot convict him on, and he gets off pretty much scot-free. So he was unlucky for a time, but got very lucky there in the end. Shifting views. Now, this I'm going to not spend too much time on, but has anyone seen this movie here? Okay, in that movie, I watched it. I thought it was an all right movie, but it portrays Mary Surratt too nicely. Mary Surratt is very interesting. Leading up to her execution, there was pretty much unanimous opinion in the North that she deserved to be hanged. Almost immediately after she is hanged, the entire North went, "Holy crap, we just hanged a woman." what did we do? That's wrong. She was an innocent woman. She didn't know what was going on. She couldn't have known. She was all, she should have been at life in prison. You can't hang womanhood. This is the Victorian period, mind you. I'm not kidding, it's an almost immediate turnaround. So that's a very interesting point. And then Mudd over there, his family wants to erase his name from being one of the guilty members. So they almost from when he is sentenced, they work very, very hard throughout the years, even up until, I think there was a Supreme Court case, when was it? Back in the 90s, I think, about getting Mudd essentially pardoned completely and overturned. So they worked very, very hard to get Mudd's name to pretty much where it is today, that he was just a good doctor. But really interesting thing on the Supreme Court case, the ruling was that the Supreme Court could not completely pardon Mudd and erase his name from this. The reason being was because Johnson had pardoned him back in 1869 and let him go off that way. If Johnson had not done that, then the Supreme Court could have actually ruled that he could have been gotten off completely. But the Supreme Court also said your evidence is lacking also, so no matter what, you lose. But anyway. So that pretty much wraps up my talk. I have gone a lot longer than I had planned, but hopefully you all enjoyed it. So any questions about anything at all? Thank you. Yes, sir.
I didn't know that there was Confederate agents in Montreal, Canada.
Oh, yeah.
Are any of those facts in those books you said for us to read? Or?
Blood on the Money is the best book I read of this entire thing. It is extremely interesting. Edward Steers Jr. is probably the preeminent historian on the assassination plot. And a large part of that book is linking the Confederate government to the plots itself. So it goes in a lot to the Confederate Secret Service and what's going on in Little Richmond. My favorite story out of that, which I won't recant here because it's a bit long, is a biological warfare plot, which was to use yellow fever in the North to infect northern cities. So yeah, Blood on the Moon, if you want Confederate Secret Service stuff, read that one. It is extremely good with that, and from that you can get more books to branch off into other things. But that book itself, very, very good in the Confederate Secret Service. Judah P. Benjamin, by the way, very involved in all of that. And if you want to see his cribbage set, we have it next door in the White House. So anyway. Yes, sir.
Something you said made me wonder. You said that probably if he had killed Johnson, that would have been the best.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. But I was thinking if he had killed Johnson and Lincoln had been killed, who would have been president? Was that Schuyler Colfax? Was he the Speaker of the House, and was that the?
Well, the way, looking into it back then, the way I believe it should have happened was, of course, if Johnson and Lincoln are both killed, it should be the president pro temp with the Senate.
Okay.
He becomes president first, and then you get the secretary. Then you get the Speaker of the House, and then it becomes Secretary of State, and then it should be Secretary of the Treasury, and then Secretary of War. But I don't believe past essentially pro temp and Speaker of the House. I don't believe they really, the standard modern line of succession that's very detailed in a constitutional amendment, that had not been laid out yet. But they did have at least up to pro temp and Speaker of the House. So Booth kind of targeted the wrong folks, but it would have caused tremendous chaos. But I don't think it actually would have that much because Stanton was around and he would have done what he did anyway, which is essentially run the government for the first few months while things kind of calmed down. But I believe it would have been the president pro temp, who I don't know who that was though. But yes, sir.
You mentioned Spangler did his 6 and then whatever. Where did he end up going?
Oh, let's see. Let me look through. He ends up.
He doesn't live very long.
He doesn't live very long. He gets, I believe, tuberculosis and dies. I remember this correctly. He doesn't do much post that's of any real renown. So he's kind of sticks to his menial jobs like he had at the stagehand. He gets, I think it's TB and dies that way.
He stays.
No, not there, but he essentially, he does not go back to Ford's Theater. A little bit too brazen to do that. But he does essentially do stuff like that. So not very well-paying jobs, but doesn't do anything super renowned. He's not like Mudd or Surratt. Especially, Surratt goes on speaking tours after his trial and talks about the trial and everything like that. But Spangler just essentially peters around think it's TB, and dies not long afterwards.
I think he went to live with, actually with Mudd. I think that Mudd took him in when he got out of prison. He stayed with Mudd.
Not 100% sure on that, but that could, actually, you know what, I do believe you're right on that. A while after that, I do think that he does end up taking him in. I think I remember that correctly. Yes, sir.
What was the specific evidence to make Dr. Mudd guilty, other than forgetting things, not telling the truth, and so forth? What actually did he do to convict him?
Well, hold on, let me just real quickly flip through my large thing of notes to make sure I get to the right. One of the books on there, the last book on there, the case against Dr. Mudd, deals out in more detail than I can go into now. But essentially, Mudd's thing is that he was seen as a Confederate operative, and that was pretty much established through letters and information by locals in the area. The letter from Charles Martin to Booth to then introduce Mudd, that helps convict him in that way. Also, Mudd's story comes out badly. His lies are unfolded very quickly. He originally says he has no idea that Booth was there. The boot upstairs kind of disproves that anyway. Then he says, okay, yeah, I met Booth one time before that. That's quickly disproved because Booth and Mudd are seen meeting at a Catholic church that is not Mudd's traditional Catholic church. It's actually out of the diocese for, I think that's the right word, for Mudd. Because Mudd goes out of his way to meet Booth at some different place. And then, so he says, okay, fine, I met him twice. That's disproven again when it comes to light that Booth actually stayed the night at Mudd's house, went around and helped buy a horse with Mudd the next day, kind of was shown around the area with Mudd. So those really deep connections with Booth essentially get him life in prison. But he's not so far, he's almost convicted. It was by, I believe, one vote that he was not given execution. Might be two, I believe it's one vote he wasn't actually executed. And that's mainly on the fact of his social status. But due to the fact that they had multiple witnesses, multiple documents linking him to know Booth, linking him to actually have just essentially knowing Booth and being seen with Booth prior to the assassination, essentially gets him convicted for life in prison.
Sounds like to me it's guilt by association.
It's a little bit less than, I mean, it's more than that, because he does, now more of this comes out a little bit later. ATZERODT's confession actually really does help a lot. That is alluded to in the trial, and that is one of the main reasons he's also not executed, because it does not come out in the trial. ATZERODT's confession is lost up until 1974, in which, in that case, it's laid out that that one of the main places that Booth was going to go, would choose a few once he got out of D.C. One of the options was Mudd's house, where provisions would be provided for him to be carried on afterwards on his continual escape south. So ATZERODT essentially in that says Mudd was involved in all of this. Yes, George.
At what point did they decide to shift from kidnapping to shooting, and why?
It's hard to delve into an exact point in there. There's no exact date that seems to come out, but they do attempt the kidnapping plot in, I believe, March of 1865, and it fails. Following that, Booth then goes on to be more of the killing part of it. And there are different reasons as to one could speculate to why. There's no exact concrete reason that I came across as to exactly why. Some would say it's the fall of Richmond, but that's not true either, because that happened after Booth had already switched. I believe it was more so because of the rumored changes coming along following the war, the 13th Amendment going through and that becoming an actual law, abolishing slavery, rumors of enfranchising former slaves and blacks in general to get the vote, making them full-on citizens, that sort of thing, because Booth was an ardent, essentially white supremacist, to use a modern term for it. So that really essentially pushed him further along to actually assassinating Lincoln and taking out the entire northern government. But also the fact that as essentially once the kidnapping plot ends, when it fails around March, by then it's kind of well known that kidnapping Lincoln wouldn't do much because the POWs wouldn't help the South as much as they would have earlier in the year. So they think their only last-ditch effort then would be to essentially cause chaos in the northern government, and then through that, the South can somehow still survive. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all for coming by. I do hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you again.